The list you are about to hear covers 8 documented contract killings. Every entry is established in the federal record, in FBI files released under the Freedom of Information Act, in federal court testimony, in Senate hearing transcripts, or in the documented work of recognized organized crime historians. Nothing on this list is rumor. Nothing here is legend. This is the documented history of 8 authorized killings and the political consequences that followed each one. Number 1 is the most consequential single act in American organized crime since the Castellano War. The specific facts of how it was planned and how it destroyed the man who ordered it may still surprise you. The criteria for this list are precise. Every hit must be established by at least 2 reputable sources. Reputable means FBI files, federal court records, Senate hearing transcripts, or the work of recognized mob historians. Selwyn Raab, Anthony DeStefano, Jerry Capecci, Nicholas Pileggi, or Gus Russo. Every hit must represent a turning point in a family's internal power, in the structure of organized crime, or in the federal government's investigative response to it. And every target must be a deceased individual whose killing is established on the documentary record. What ranks a hit higher on this list is not the number of rounds fired. It is the audacity of the target, the precision of the operation, the political calculation behind it, and the consequences that the federal record documents followed. We count up from 8. Hit number 8. October 4th, 1951. Joe's Elbow Room, a restaurant in Cliffside Park, New Jersey. A group of men gathered for lunch. One of them was Willie Moretti, also known as Willie Moore, the senior Genovese family figure who had controlled organized crime operations across New Jersey for more than 2 decades. Moretti had appeared before the United States Senate Special Committee to investigate crime in interstate commerce, the Kefauver Committee, in January 1951. He was not evasive, he was cheerful, even glib, making jokes at the senator's expense. What he revealed was limited, but the manner of his appearance, the openness, the casual comfort on a national stage, alarmed the men who ran the commission. The deeper problem was medical. Selwyn Raab documented in 5 families that Moretti had been suffering for years from the advanced neurological effects of untreated syphilis. His judgment was deteriorating. His mouth was becoming unpredictable. In a man who knew as much as Willie Moretti knew, that combination, a national congressional appearance, a degenerating mind, an increasingly loose manner, was sufficient grounds for the commission to convene a formal discussion about his future. According to Raab and to FBI files from the period, Vito Genovese pressed for Moretti's removal. Frank Costello, who was Moretti's protector and longtime associate, opposed it. The vote went against Costello. At Joe's Elbow Room on October 4th, the men seated with Moretti stood and shot him in the head. He was 57 years old. The killers walked out. The FBI files on the Moretti killing establish it as a commission-sanctioned authorization, what Genovese family figures in the documented record referred to, with studied detachment, as a mercy killing. The mercy, in the calculus of organized crime, was directed not at Moretti, but at the family itself. Hit number 7, April 15th, 1931. The Nuovo Villa Tamaro restaurant, West 15th Street, Coney Island, Brooklyn. Giuseppe Masseria, known as Joe the Boss, had been running the most powerful faction in New York, organized crime, for over a decade. By April 1931, the Castellano War had been grinding for more than a year. Masseria's nominal subordinate, Charles Luciano, then still known as Salvatore Lucania, had been conducting quiet negotiations with the opposing faction's leader, Salvatore Maranzano. The offer was direct: end the war, end Masseria. According to Selwyn Raab's account in 5 families and to FBI files from the period, Luciano arranged a long lunch with Masseria at the Nuovo Villa Tamaro on April 15th. Luciano excused himself to use the bathroom. He was not at the table when 4 men walked in and shot Giuseppe Masseria 4 times. He died in his seat. The FBI files and documented historical record identified the suspected gunmen as 4 men who would become central figures in American organized crime for the next 3 decades: Bugsy Siegel, Vito Genovese, Joe Adonis, and Albert Anastasia. None was ever charged. The killing itself was never prosecuted. What the Masseria hit produced was the end of the Castellano War and, within months, the organizational structure of the modern American mafia, the commission, the 5-family structure, the National Conference in Chicago in 1931, that established the rules every subsequent boss operated under. Joe the boss was killed so that everything that came after him could be built. Hit number 6, October 23, 1935. The Palace Chop House and Tavern, 12 East Park Street, Newark, New Jersey. Arthur Fliegenheimer, known professionally as Dutch Schultz, was sitting at a back table with 3 associates, Abe Landau, Otto Berman, and Bernard Rosenkrantz. 2 men walked in. One of them, Charles Workman, known in the Murder Incorporated network as Charlie the Bug, shot all 4 men at the table. Schultz survived the initial shooting but died the following day, October 24, 1935. What places the Schultz killing on this list is not the execution itself. It is the Commission's reason for ordering it. By 1935, Schultz was facing sustained prosecution by Thomas Dewey, then a special prosecutor in New York. He presented the Commission with a formal proposal: authorize the assassination of Dewey before Dewey could convict him. Kill the prosecutor. As documented in FBI files and in Dewey's own subsequent prosecution records, the Commission considered the proposal and rejected it. The concern was not moral. The concern was institutional survival. Killing a high-profile special prosecutor would produce a federal response that no family anywhere in the country could manage. The Commission's judgment was that Schultz himself was the liability. With Schultz removed, the Dewey pressure would remain, but the specific provocation would be gone. The contract went to Murder Incorporated, the enforcement arm operating out of Brownsville, Brooklyn, under the authority of Louis Lepke and Albert Anastasia. Workman carried it out. He was eventually convicted in 1941 after cooperating witness Abe Reles provided grand jury and trial testimony documenting Murder Incorporated's operations. Workman pleaded no contest to the Schultz killing and was sentenced to life in prison. He was paroled in 1964. The Schultz hit is on this list because it represents the Commission acting as a governing body to protect its own institutional survival, authorizing the killing of one of its own to prevent an outcome that would have destroyed everyone else. Hit number 5, June 20th, 1947. 810 Linden Drive, Beverly Hills, California. Benjamin Siegel was sitting in the living room of Virginia Hill's house, reading a newspaper. A .30 caliber military carbine was fired through the living room window from the garden. Siegel was struck multiple times. He died at the scene. 3 men walked into the Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas and announced that they were taking control of operations. The timing was precise. The Siegel killing sits in the documented record of the Senate Kefauver Committee hearings of 1950 and 1951, in FBI files that extend to hundreds of pages, and in historian Gus Russo's documented account in The Outfit. What those records establish is the financial context. The Flamingo Hotel had run approximately $6 million over its projected construction budget. The mob's investment was not returning, and within the organized crime partnership that funded the Flamingo, FBI surveillance reports from the period document a growing conviction that Siegel, or those close to him, had been diverting funds. Who gave the authorization for the Siegel killing was never established in court. No one was ever charged. The Kefauver Committee examined the killing in 1951 and reached no definitive conclusion on authorization. FBI files point to discussions within the National Crime Syndicate leadership, but no prosecution followed. What the Siegel killing established in the historical record was simple. Financial unreliability at the highest levels of the syndicate had a documented price, and Las Vegas transferred to new management before the body was removed from 810 Linden Drive. Hit number 4, April 7, 1972. Umberto's Clam House, 129 Mulberry Street, Little Italy, Manhattan. It was approximately 4:20 in the morning. Joseph Gallo, documented in the federal record as Crazy Joe Gallo, was celebrating his 43rd birthday at a table that included members of his immediate family. He had been released from federal prison less than 2 years earlier, in 1971, after serving nearly a decade on an extortion conviction. Joseph Colombo, the boss of the Colombo family, was shot at Columbus Circle during a public rally. He was left in a vegetative state and died in 1978. FBI investigation records and the documented account in Selwyn Raab's 5 Families established that Colombo family leadership concluded Gallo's post-prison positioning and his prison-built alliances made him a suspect in the arrangement of the Colombo shooting, although Gallo's direct involvement was never established in federal court. Multiple gunmen entered Umberto's Clam House in the early hours of April 7th. Gallo was shot several times. He rose from the table and staggered to the sidewalk on Mulberry Street, where he died. The Gallo killing places on this list, for reasons beyond its violence. It was carried out in a crowded public restaurant in the middle of the night, with members of the subject's family present, on the occasion of his birthday. The FBI surveillance records and subsequent federal investigation established it as a deliberate message that there was no protected location, no protected hour, and no protected company. The Colombo family was demonstrating, in public and in front of witnesses, that its response to a perceived act of war would be total. Hit number 3. July 12, 1979. Joe and Mary's Italian-American restaurant, 205 Knickerbocker Avenue, Bushwick, Brooklyn. Carmine Galante, the boss of the Bonanno family, was eating lunch on the outdoor patio. He was 69 years old. A cigar was in his mouth when the shooters arrived. Federal crime scene photographs entered into subsequent prosecution records show the cigar remained there after he was shot. The Galante killing is documented in FBI files, in Anthony DeStefano's reporting on the Bonanno family, and in Selwyn Raab's 5 families. Those records established that the authorization came from the commission itself, that Galante had antagonized the other New York families sufficiently that his removal was a collective decision. Galante's specific offense, as documented in FBI surveillance records of the period, was consolidation without consultation. He had been expanding Bonanno family narcotics operations without sharing proceeds or seeking commission clearance. He had been operating as though the commission's authority did not apply to him. The Genovese family had reached the conclusion that he could not be managed. 2 of Galante's personal bodyguards were at the table that afternoon, Baldassare Amato and Cesare Bonventre. According to FBI files and the account in 5 families, they stepped aside when the shooters arrived. Both were subsequently investigated for their role in the conspiracy. Bonventre was killed in a separate dispute in 1984. Amato was eventually convicted on federal charges. Also killed at the table were Galante's bodyguard Leonardo Coppola and the restaurant's co-owner, Giuseppe Turano, who had no documented involvement in organized crime and was present by circumstance alone. The Galante killing demonstrated what the commission was still capable of in 1979, authorizing the removal of a sitting boss and using that boss's own bodyguards as the mechanism of entry. Hit number 2, October 25, 1957. The Park Sheraton Hotel Barbershop, 7th Avenue, Manhattan. Albert Anastasia, documented in FBI files as the operational head of Murder Incorporated during its most active years, and as the boss of what would later be named the Gambino family. According to Selwyn Raab's 5 families and FBI file 92-3267, Anastasia had held the boss position since approximately 1951, following the disappearance of Vincent Mangano. In the years that followed, he accumulated enemies methodically. He was consolidating power. He was poaching members from other families. FBI surveillance records from the period document formal complaints from other bosses about a specific charge, that Anastasia had been selling membership, accepting payment in exchange for making men, which violated the structural rules the commission had operated under since 1931. The calculation behind the hit involved Vito Genovese, who wanted to reconfigure the New York power balance, and Carlo Gambino, who was Anastasia's underboss and stood to benefit directly from his removal. According to the documented record in 5 families, and Anthony DeStefano's The Last Godfather, Genovese and Gambino reached an understanding. The authorization was arranged. 2 men in dark suits walked into the Park Sheraton barbershop and fired 8 shots into chair number 4. Albert Anastasia died on the floor. He had a federal grand jury subpoena in his pocket. The gunmen were never charged. The killing was never prosecuted. What followed was the Appalachian Meeting, a gathering of more than 60 organized crime figures at the estate of Joseph Barbara in Appalachian, New York, on November 14, 1957, convened in part to address the power transfer. State police observed and disrupted it. The Appalachian Meeting produced more sustained federal scrutiny of organized crime than any single event since the Kefauver Committee hearings. J. Edgar Hoover, who had long publicly minimized the existence of a national crime syndicate, was forced by the Appalachian evidence to acknowledge it. The Anastasia killing is on this list because it is one of the few documented mob hits in American history that produced a federal response larger than the act itself. Hit number 1, December 16, 1985, East 46th Street and 3rd Avenue, Manhattan. It was approximately 5:15 in the evening, rush hour in Midtown, the sidewalks crowded. A black Lincoln Continental pulled to the curb in front of Sparks Steakhouse. Paul Castellano, the boss of the Gambino family, stepped out. His driver and underboss, Thomas Bellotti, stepped out with him. Both men were shot multiple times on the sidewalk within seconds of each other. They died at the scene. John Gotti, the acting head of the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club crew in the Gambino family, was observing from a position across the street. He left before law enforcement arrived. What elevates the Castellano and Bellotti killings to the top of this list is documented in the federal court record across three distinct dimensions. The first is authorization, or its deliberate absence. Gotti did not seek commission approval before ordering the removal of the boss of the Gambino family. Under the rules the commission had operated under since Luciano formalized them in 1931, killing a sitting boss without commission sanction was itself a capital offense. Gotti was aware of this. As documented in Selwyn Raab's 5 Families and in FBI surveillance records of the period, Gotti judged, correctly, as events would confirm, that the remaining bosses, several of whom had their own concerns about Castellano's pending commission case prosecution, would accept the outcome and the man who produced it. The second is the testimony of Salvatore Gravano. In 1991, Gravano, who had served as Gotti's underboss and who had personally participated in the planning of the Castellano hit, agreed to cooperate with federal prosecutors. His cooperation produced the most consequential mob testimony since Joseph Valachi's McClellan Committee appearance in 1963. In testimony documented in United States v. Gotti, tried in 1992, Gravano stated that he had been present during the planning of the hit, that he had helped coordinate the shooter teams, and that Gotti had given the order. Gravano admitted to his own role in 19 killings as part of his cooperation agreement. His testimony, combined with FBI recordings obtained from devices planted inside the Ravenite Social Club on Mulberry Street, produced Gotti's conviction on all 14 counts. What the federal record documents, in trial transcripts, in FBI surveillance records, and in Raab's 5 Families, is that the Castellano hit was not a two-man operation. It was a coordinated action involving multiple shooter teams positioned at separate locations around Spark Steakhouse, with contingency coverage in case the primary approach was disrupted. Bellotti was killed simultaneously to prevent him from identifying the shooters or organizing an immediate response. The entire operation was planned across several weeks. It was executed in under 60 seconds on a crowded midtown sidewalk during the Monday evening rush hour without a single civilian casualty. The organizational discipline required to produce that outcome and to disperse successfully into a crowd that size is itself part of what the federal investigation spent years documenting. The consequences of December 16, 1985, were precisely what the historical and federal record establishes. Gotti assumed control of the Gambino family. The FBI, which had already been constructing a surveillance case on his crew, intensified every aspect of its operation. The RICO prosecution that resulted produced a life sentence. Gotti died in federal prison in June 2002. What the Castellano killing did not do was protect the man who ordered it. What it did do, as documented in every historical account of the RICO era that followed, was end the Commission's viability as a functional governing body. After December 1985, no boss operated under the assumption that Commission sanction provided Commission protection. The institutional architecture Luciano built in 1931 did not survive the sidewalk on East 46th Street. The 8 killings documented tonight span 54 years of American organized crime. From the Castellamarese War through the RICO era, each one is in the federal record. Each one produced consequences that federal prosecutors spent years establishing. Each one represents the Commission's authority, or the collapse of it, in documented action. It bears stating clearly what the men on this list represent, within the broader context of American history. Italian-American organized crime was a small criminal minority within the Italian-American community of the 20th century. The broader Italian-American community, which built American cities, served in 2 world wars, founded major industries, and produced generations of artists, scientists, educators, and public servants, has no connection to the conduct documented in this episode. The men who were killed and the men who ordered their killings represent a criminal underworld that federal prosecutors spent half a century systematically dismantling. The rest of the community built something else entirely. Organized crime built its empire in the dark. Federal prosecutors and historians spent decades dragging it into the light. The 5 Family Files exists to document what they found, Not to glorify it, not to bury it, but to remember it. Sources for everything covered tonight are in the description. This has been The 5 Family Files. Good night from the archive.